The majority of the world is currently on lockdown due to you-know-what. At least most countries around the world are enforcing shelter-in-place orders, which all but the most conspiratorial of conspiracy theorists and loyal fans of certain radio talk show hosts are following. Luckily, those two groups are far outnumbered by those taking heed to warnings to stay at home if possible. And it means that unless people are key workers who happen to work in essential industries, they're not driving. Fewer people driving means fewer cars on the road and a lower daily consumption of fossil fuels. This, in turn, means a drop in oil consumption, which in turn has led in a kind of about way to yesterday's headlines about the prices of oil becoming negative. And that's led to some pretty crazy claims along with those news stories, like how petrol stations will now be paying you to fill up, or how it will spell the end for electric vehicles. I've heard even crazier stories in the last 24 hours, but I'm not going to waste your time repeating them here. Instead, I'm going to try and explain what is going on and why this won't be the end of EVs. Yeah, I know. I'm talking about the nemesis of every good electric vehicle fan out there, fossil fuel. But I think there's so much disinformation flying around that I'm going to try and give you a brief primer to explain what's really going on. Let's start with the basics. Oil-producing nations like the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Venezuela, Norway make millions of barrels of unrefined crude oil per day. In fact, the top 20 oil-producing nations in the world each mine more than 1 million barrels per day. Even a small nation like Barbados managed to churn out 1,000 barrels of crude oil per day. And in case you were interested, a barrel of crude oil equals about 19 gallons of gasoline. Every day, more than 80 million barrels of oil are extracted from the earth, the equivalent of more than 1.5 billion gallons of gasoline. And in recent months, because of a spat over oil prices between Russia and Saudi Arabia, two of the largest oil-producing countries in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC if you prefer, more oil has been produced than is actually needed. And when there's a surplus of oil, the price of oil drops. And in this case, the argument over pricing and subsequent oversupply happened just as the world was shutting down to slow the spread of coronavirus, which of course resulted in fewer people going anywhere at all, which led to oil consumption dropping off the metaphorical cliff. Which brings us to that negative oil price, and as many things in life, it's all to do with Wall Street. You see, while you might think that Wall Street just trades in shares and companies, it also trades commodities, including grain and oil, among many, many other things. And in the case of oil, it works like this. A trader sees that an oil producer has oil they've just taken out of the ground, and they're looking for people to promise to buy and transport the oil when it makes its landfall wherever the trader is. Traders buy the rights to those barrels in something called the futures market. And just before that oil actually arrives, they'll sell the rights to those barrels to an oil refinery, a government, or some other entity that has a need for crude oil. Because let's face it, there are a lot of things in our world today that are made from oil. Those traders, well, they make their profit and disappear off to invest that profit in something else. Usually, this system works perfectly. Traders, after all, have no way to store or refine oil and are betting on the likelihood that the price they've paid will be less than the price they'll be able to sell for. And in a world where you can't get enough oil, that works nicely. But right now, oil refineries and stockpiles are full. They don't need huge amounts of oil, and so they're not buying oil from those traders. But the traders have been getting desperate, as they can be fined if they don't take possession of the oil, and they also have no way of physically doing that. And thus, they've literally been paying those who do have capabilities to store and refine the oil to take it off their hands, which is why we're left with a negative oil price. Now we've covered what's really been going on with oil prices, let's explain how it's going to relate to electric cars. And before I do that, I should probably note that no, gas stations aren't suddenly going to pay you to fill up, no matter what your crazy aunt or uncle says. That's because in the little scenario I've just laid out above, while the traders on Wall Street are losing money by paying people to take oil off their hands, the people who end up benefiting from that the refiners and other entities with the ability to actually store and/or refine oil get to sell that oil on as they usually would. Sure, the price of gasoline and diesel is dropping because of lower demand and lower overheads for refineries. I mean, in some cases, they're actually getting oil for free. But there's a big difference between free and lower priced, especially when your average motorist isn't able to take advantage of having all of those oil barrels. So where does this leave us? And where does it leave the notion that this is all bad news for electric cars? In order for this to be completely bad for electric vehicles, we'd need to see an abundance of oil combined with an increase in consumption. In that instance, people would feel less economic burden to switch to electric vehicles because gasoline would be so cheap. But what we actually have right now is a situation where oil is cheap, gasoline is becoming cheaper, but people aren't able to take advantage of it because of stay-at-home orders. That means fewer people are using gasoline. Add in the spectre of a recession, meaning people are likely to have less money to spend, and the net difference between prices now and what they were is less prominent. Sure, gas may cost less, but if you're earning less, you're not going to feel the benefit. And if oil producers can't get rid of oil as easily as they once could, there will be a point when they're going to have to produce less oil or go bankrupt. And that will drive the price back up. As for electric cars, sure, in the short term, I think the lure of cheap oil will keep some people in petrol vehicles, especially if they can't afford to buy a new car due to uncertainty over work or income. But the current crisis has also taught a lot of people that we could all have a better air quality, similar to the air quality that's recently been seen around the world, if only we cut back on our fossil fuel emissions. And that's already having an impact. Certainly if the number of people who've reached out to me to ask about electric cars recently is representative of general trends. And that's not even mentioning several studies that are suggesting the same thing over the last few weeks. This all ignores, however, a couple of things that have been in motion long before this all happened. First, there's a general trend in the auto industry towards electric vehicles, which is being driven by increasingly tough emissions and fuel economy standards in most parts of the world. And yes, while the current incumbent of Pennsylvania Avenue may have tweeted today about glorious American oil and glorious American gas, most countries around the world are doing absolutely everything they can to ditch their fossil fuel addiction. And that does and will have an impact on what type of cars automakers will be able to make. If you combine that with the drive towards more affordable electric cars, something that sadly US automakers are struggling to do, but other automakers around the world are embracing, as I covered yesterday, albeit slowly, with the fact that oil prices won't remain low when demand goes back up, and I think the electric vehicle world will continue to grow, free oil or not. So if your weird aunt, uncle or work colleague tries to tell you that electric cars are dying because they're giving away free oil and free gas for your vehicle, well, you're going to know differently. That's it. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to help us make more videos like this, please do like, comment and subscribe. You can send us a couple of dollars our way every month through Patreon, or you can feed our coffee habit with Ko-fi. I just want to let you know that I am okay. I'm just suffering with hay fever, hence the croaky throat. I'll be back soon with more content for you all to enjoy. But until then, stay safe, wash your hands, and keep evolving.